can still use the windshield. And when it pops, you replace the windshield. You ever use a plate that's cracked? You can even microwave many of them. And one day it'll just fall apart, it'll crack. What if that's the condition of humanity, and that's why we give our word and we believe the truth and we act on the truth, and then we lose our way? This is always a dangerous question, so I'll kind of ask it in kind of a reflective way. Has anyone ever promised and then didn't keep their promises? Broke your word? Justifiably so. I was working in a halfway home. I had 30 men under my charge. I left a really good job because the boss said we have great money, great benefits, 40 hours a week. I left my job. I started to work with them. About 6 weeks into it, he says, by the way, he says, we didn't get all the money I thought we were going to get. I said, you didn't say we're going to get. You said we had. I said, what are the consequences now? Because I quit my job 6 weeks ago. Someone else is doing that job. He said, well, we're going to have to work 60 hours a week, and you're going to have to pay for your own benefits. And I was upset. Upset enough where a friend of mine came in, and he had heard about it, and he thought maybe I wanted to talk about it. So he comes in to talk about it with me. And I said to him, his name was Don Stevens. I said, he's passed away, so he doesn't care if I use his name. I said, you know, I said, well, some people don't want you using their name, you know. What does he care? Well, maybe he does. I don't know. What if there isn't? Maybe he's taking notes. When I get there, I'm going to be in trouble. I don't know. So I said to him, you know, the guy lied to me. He told me he was telling me, and he lied to me. I said, I'd be right if I quit. And this is what this man said. We're talking about the truth here. This is what this man said. Don looked at me and he said, how many men are on your charge? I was a senior therapist, staff therapist at this halfway home. I said, 30 men. He says, I wonder what, he says, you'd be right if you quit. The man lied to you. He said, I just wonder what would be best. He said a bad word. I said, damn. I thought right and wrong had to do with the truth, and now he throws the word best in there. And that changed the whole way I thought about it. I stayed for another 18 months until they found someone qualified to replace me. Epistemology is all about finding out what's really real, the truth about the world we live in, people. It seems to be important. Everybody said it's important. And yet I brought up scenarios. Seems very hard to get a handle on this truth and stay with the truth. Any questions for me about why I'm doing this now? Okay. So I did this because this touches us where we live. Oftentimes philosophy seems out here somewhere. I don't know why we're learning this. I don't see how it applies. It applies, I think, directly to our lives. Go. Why bother to search for the truth? Which brings us to two different ways in the West that we look at it. One we said was foundationalism. Foundationalists believe in absolute and universal truths. There is a beauty out there somewhere, and it will always be the standard for all other beauty. Some of them believe you can find it through reason. They believe that the truth is innate within us. We're born with it. I'll give you two examples. One is Socrates, an ancient Greek philosopher. Now, no one has seen Socrates. Plato wrote about him, and some of us think that Socrates was a figment of Plato's imagination. He used him as kind of a storytelling point. But he tells this story about Socrates, and Socrates believes that all truth is innate in you. You're born with it. He believes you have an immortal soul, and that immortal soul is imprinted with all the truth you're ever going to have in your life. How do you get to the truth? You use reason. Reason will uncover it. So he takes a slave boy who has never been trained in mathematics, and he's going to prove that the knowledge is in him. I just have to help him discover it. So he takes a square, and he says, how would you double the size of the square? So the boy takes the sides, and he doubles each side, and it ends up being 4 times as big rather than twice as big. And Socrates says, well, let's try this. And the boy does this, and let's do this and this, and he kind of leads them all around, and the boy finally gets to the truth. And he says, see, you just needed someone to help you. It's called a teacher. That they believe the truth is already innate in you. It's imprinted in you from birth. And all you need is a mentor or teacher who can just kind of lead you down the pathway of your brain, not yours, but the pathway of your brain, and can get you to the truth. Well, that's interesting. And Socrates then, his logic shows flaw. He thought that proves that the soul is immortal and has all truth in it. Well, it just shows that Socrates is good at getting you to understand something that you didn't think you understood, and he thinks that proves that it's been in there all along, and he just has the key to unlock it. And the key to unlocking it is reason. Okay, so that's ancient Greece. So I have a professor in grad school, Paul Ziff, genius, recognized throughout America as being a genius, philosopher of language, philosopher of logic. So in grad school, what'll happen, or maybe they won't do it anymore, but they used to get all the grad students together, the master's degree, the PhD degrees, and the big heads would come out and they'd share their stuff with us. So Paul's there one day, and he presents this idea he was thinking about. And I'm sitting there listening to it, and I said, that's really cool. I never would have thought of that. And he says, but the problem with that idea, he says, I thought about it more and more and realized the idea was flawed, and I came to this idea about it. And I'm sitting there thinking, boy, I didn't see that coming, but that's really cool. And then he says, but then I realized that this was not quite right with it. And what he did is he led us all around in an hour's lecture to these new revelations and new discoveries and refinements of what he thought was really real and true, except it really wasn't, because it hadn't quite arrived at that place of saying, this is absolutely true. And when he was done with the lecture, he says, well, I haven't arrived at the truth yet, have I? Because I've already proven to myself a half a dozen times I was not at the truth when I thought I was at the truth. The problem with using reason and believing ideas are innate is that reason's a tool, people, and tools are great as long as you apply the tool to something that it can be used for. Do you know the difference between imperials and metric systems? Imperial systems are inches and yards and things like that, and metrics are all based on tens. If you ever buy a tool set, they'll come with metric and they'll come with imperial. And if you have something that needs a ratchet and it's a metric and you try and use an imperial on it, it'll take the nut and just rub the edges off it if you do it too much. It's a tool. It does the same thing as the metric, but they're not calibrated the same way. So you have to have the right tool to get the right result. You can use deductive logic and get the right result, but we had fallacies in logic as well. You think you're getting to the right answer, you're not getting to the right answer. And you can use inductive logic and be pretty sure you arrived at the right answer and end up not being at the center of truth either. It's a tool. It's a valuable tool, and in the West, we maximize it. But then we have people who are empiricists. Now, rationalists and imperialists believe you can find the absolute truth. Empiricists believe it depends on perception. Now, when I shared perception with you, I said there's a built-in problem with perception. And they acknowledge there is. See, we're all hardwired to a specific perspective. We cannot see the blue shift and the red shift, so the Hubble telescope shows us what's really out there. We can't see X-rays, so we have machines that do this. We have machines that magnify 1 billion times or more, and now we find out that viruses are really nasty little critters that we can't see, but they'll kill you if you don't have a proper defense against them. So we're hardwired, and we're limited in our hardwiring, and we have what's called perspectives or perceptions. So the empiricists start with perceptions, and they say, well, we think we found a method to find the truth. So we have a fella, his name is John Locke. He's probably the best one we have. And he says what happens is all the objects have two sets of qualities. There's what we call primary qualities. There's texture, there's size, there's dimension to it. And those don't change. Everybody sees that. We can pretty well all verify the size of this, or the size of this table, or when we stand up next to one another, who's taller and who isn't. Those are kind of verifiable. Locke calls those primary qualities. Then he says there's secondary qualities. So the first day in class, one of the things I showed you was the blue-green, green-blue cup. And I think only Ashanti and I agreed that it looked like green-blue rather than blue-green. Locke calls those secondary qualities, and those are where we get off track. So he says if we can get rid of the biases that are built into us, what's left is the truth. Well, I have a question for Locke, except he's not here to answer it. I also showed you the first day that we have the harvest moon that's big and orange, and then it gets a little higher in the sky, and somehow it magically turns yellow and smaller, and then it gets up to what we call the apex, its high point in the sky. And by the way, the moon is not rising. That's an illusion. We're turning around it, and it's traversing through the sky, and it looks like it's rising, and then it gets to be a white ball, and it's as small as this. And the truth is, it's not orange, it's not yellow, it's not white, and it's not big, medium, and white. But Locke says that size is a primary quality. How do we get it wrong? There's a failure in hardwiring as well. There are perceptions that we can't fit through. The rationalists will tell us, well, the atmosphere, when it's dense on the horizon, acts like a magnifying glass, and that's why things look bigger than they do at the top. And so in this quest for the truth, we're trying to find tools that work, because we all said the truth was important. In fact, many times we change the course of our lives based on what people tell us. We believe it's the truth, and it affects the way we interact with one another. So you're going to see these two groups on your quiz, people. You're going to see foundationalists who argue that rationality is universal, objective, and absolute. Now, next week we'll learn how Plato thinks this. He's got something called the forms. Constructivists, or constructivism, argues that rationalities are local and based on intersubjective agreement, also called anti-foundationalism. For them, all values, all truth is cultural. It's culture to culture. Now, sometimes cultures agree with one another, but they say there's no hard-fire way to prove that what we all believe together is really the truth. We could all believe a lie. We could all believe that there are aliens. And it turns out there's no aliens. Turns out we're the only ones in the entire universe. Now, we all don't believe that. You ask a good scientist, an interplanetary scientist, ask them, do you believe that there's life on other planets? And they'll all raise their hands. The odds say there has to be. Show me one bit of evidence that there's life on another planet. We have subjective evidence, but show me proof. Then how can we all, how many of you believe there's life on other planets? Okay. It's very believable. Of course it is. Is there any proof? Okay, so now let me turn the coin over the other way. How many of you believe in the existence of an all-knowing being, a God? Some do. Is there any proof? Faith? Scientists have faith. You all have faith, by the way. I don't know if you know that. You come in a room, you turn the light switch on, you have faith that the light's going on. Put the key in the ignition and turn it on, you have faith the engine's going to start. Everybody's got faith. It's what you have faith in. And the basis of your faith has a lot to do with the reality you believe it. So we have the rationalists, both those who depend on reason, and the empiricists believe there's absolute truth, and the constructivists believe it's culturally created. Foundationalism maintains that there must be objective and absolute truths. There's two types of them. I shared this with you just now, rationalists and empiricists. The reason I'm going over this now, this is nuts and bolts. Just like the language of logic was nuts and bolts, this is nuts and bolts. This is now I'm talking to you about your quizzes. So you have to have this information down correctly. Foundationalists come in two flavors, rationalists and empiricists. Constructivists come in one flavor. The truth is culturally constructed.